See everybody tonight and picking up with our third week in our new series on delivering hope, which is just some practical ministry training and how to reach out to people and how to minister to people when they're going through difficult times and situations. Let me give you a quick review in case you missed one of the 2 weeks before. The first week we talked about Jesus' role as the Good Shepherd and how he is the Good Shepherd that's led up to in the storyline of the Bible. You see David, particularly in the Old Testament, a number of shepherds, but David being the ultimate picture in the Old Testament of a good shepherd who protected his sheep. He wrote the 23rd Psalm, and how Jesus is the fulfillment of that theme, as he says in John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. How Jesus cares for his sheep, he provides for them, he protects them, he guides them. All these different roles, Jesus is the epitome of what the good shepherd is. And then, as we move on later in the New Testament, how Jesus shares that role of good shepherd with us. He does it with Peter. He tells Peter to feed my sheep. He calls different roles in the church, pastoring and shepherding roles. But then we talked about how it doesn't just stop with people that are quote-unquote pastors, but that he shares that role of being a good shepherd and providing care and guidance and even spiritual protection at times to the entire church so that we can all work together to fulfill this role of God being the good shepherd and using us to do that in other people's lives. So he's given us a great responsibility. That's what we talked about the first week. Last week we talked about when we're going about this ministry of working with people and for people in their lives when they're going through difficult times, of making a clear distinction in our own minds of the difference between care and cure. That we want to be people that are going to go and give care in situations that we oftentimes may not have any ability to offer a cure for the situation. Even though we may want to, we want to do something to help, we want to fix things. To make sure that you have clear in your mind that very often God is not calling you to take on that role. There are doctors that are called to do that. We can pray for people and let God do that, but actually taking on that curing kind of role in ministry is something that is not normally, that shouldn't be our default setting. Now there are times we talked about how we may branch out into that, but we want to do that intentionally. The main thing we want to know is that we are working with people for their care. And this is kind of the way we defined it. So what does care look like? Number one is being there. Your presence is a very powerful tool in caring for people. Second one is meeting some practical needs. So it may be bringing people food, it may be running errands for them, it may be babysitting kids for them when they need that. All kinds of different practical needs that may be met when people are going through difficult times. Another one is expressing sympathy through words or kind actions. And the last one that we named was delivering hope, which is the series title, thinking mainly about helping people to remember biblical truth and deliver the gospel hope to them at a time when hope may feel like it's nowhere close to be found, that it may have left and vanished, and you want to bring hope back to them by speaking the words of God, the words of Scripture, reminding them of his promises and his goodness to us, his love in the midst of that. So those are kind of the categories that we put around what does it look like to care for somebody versus what does it look like to try and cure somebody. We looked at the story of Lazarus particularly, where you go to a funeral like Jesus did, nobody expects you to cure. We can't fix that. Now Jesus did at the end of that story, but even when Jesus showed up, that's not what they were expecting. They weren't expecting him to raise Lazarus from the dead. So we looked at how did Jesus care in that situation. He showed up precisely on time when he meant to. He offered words of caring and gospel hope during that. He expressed sympathy, and he wasn't involved in meeting the practical needs, but there were other people in the story that were. So that was a good story to illustrate those kind of things. So today I want to put some boots on the ground for that. So when we're offering care, how can we actually do that in some different situations? And I want to offer some various situations of how can we offer care, how can we allow our presence to be there in a situation. And how are we going to go and actually do this in somebody's life? Because we've got an idea about what we want to do. We want to offer shepherding kind of care in people's lives, right? We want to help them through when they're going difficult times, guide them back to God's truth, feed them with the Word of God, give them protection, either from possibly physical protection at times. That would probably occur more often in your own family. You could think of some extreme circumstances where it may occur in other times as well. But usually protection, you'd think about physical or spiritual protection with guarding from false teaching, the care and encouragement. So how are we actually going to do this in some various situations? Today I want to talk about things like making phone calls, staying in touch with people, sending cards or gifts to people, meeting with people, whether that's out of the home, in the hospital, or in a hospital-like setting, like maybe a nursing home or rehab center or something like that. Kind of a full, broad array of different situations that we may encounter and how to deal with some of those and how to talk with people when we're in some of those situations, okay? So the first thing we want to talk about is when somebody's going through a difficult situation, how do we approach them and how do we talk to someone that is going through a difficult situation? Some of the various scenarios we've talked about are the loss of a loved one and a death, a grieving situation, maybe somebody that's going through depression or just a difficult time personally. Maybe somebody's going through a difficult family situation. Maybe somebody is actually sick and they are the ones in the hospital, or maybe they have family members and they're kind of suffering along with them. So a lot of different situations, and you could add to that. But when you encounter somebody that's going through situations like that, how are we going to speak to them? So the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to walk up to them and approach them or call them on the phone. And what's the first thing that you naturally ask somebody in most situations? What's kind of the typical?
How are you doing?
How are you doing?
Don't do that then.
How'd you know I was going to say that?
It just hit me.
How are you? How are you doing? That's our normal kind of greeting. You say that to people regardless of whether you think they're doing well or whether you know they're doing bad. It just kind of comes out. That's what you say. Hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Now, why do you think that might not be the best way to talk to somebody, especially somebody that you know is going through a difficult time?
Probably obvious how it's going.
Yeah.
They'll
Yeah, I mean,
tell
that
you.
could be the situation. You know, you're walking through a funeral line at a visitation, and you say, how are you doing?
How do you think it's going?
Yeah. I mean, what situation does that put them in to answer that question?
Makes them think about,
Yeah,
it brings that up to the forefront.
okay, yeah, there you go. Think about the two different options they have. They could say something positive. They can say, oh, I'm doing all right, when they're really not. So what you're kind of forcing them to do in that situation is you're kind of forcing them to buck up and, okay, it's really not as bad as I feel like, which you don't want to do that. Or, oh, it's terrible. I'm really not doing well. And you kind of bring focus on the fact that things are not going well at that point. So what would be an alternate way to talk to somebody that is in one of these situations that we're talking about, other than saying, how are you doing? What might be a question you could ask? I'll see if you guys have some ideas. Y'all might have some things I haven't thought of before.
Just tell them, I'm sorry for what happened or whatever, sympathize.
Yeah.
However you choose to word it, just let them know you're there.
Yeah, that's certainly one option. You can just go ahead and express sympathy for what's going on, man. I'm really sorry to hear about what's happened. I'm sorry to hear about what you're going through. I'm sorry for your loss. So you don't even put the burden on them of answering the question. So that's certainly an approach you could take of saying, I'm not going to put them in a position where they have to be in output mode. I'm gonna be in output mode and let them respond however they would like to. So I think that's a valid option, and I think that's better than how are you doing. What's another approach you might take?
What can I do to help you?
Okay, what can I do to help?
I have my friend whose father's going through the cancer and real bad time, and their mom, and they're doing awful. The Storms family,
Yeah.
and I just was like, you know, is there something that I can do to help you out, you know, babysit? And then I like started offering things, not just, you know, for her to come up with something, but I was like, babysit, make food, go to the grocery store, you know,
Yeah, definitely.
sit with them while she goes to the store, you know, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great, and that's actually, some of those things I have planned on talking about a little bit later tonight, about how to offer help and some practical ministry needs. So I think those are really good ideas. That's probably not going to come as much at the beginning of the conversation, like I'm.
And it
like
also
I'm-
depends on who you're talking to, too.
Sure, yeah.
Because like if it's like, she's a really good friend of mine, so I'm immediately.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, somebody that you're closer to, you know, you're going to
You're not
have
that close to them.
more openness to talk in situations like this rather than somebody you don't know as well.
Well,
So,
that's
yeah,
right.
but we'll come back to that, Dave. Those are some good suggestions there.
Yeah, I was going to say something like that, but I was thinking of a question, but it would be somebody you know probably. What feelings are you experiencing today?
No, I'm worse.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that one's kind of putting you in a similar
How do you do it?
situation
How do you do
of, yeah. Here's one guy that had gone down and done a lot of disaster relief with Hurricane Katrina with North Carolina Baptist, and he was a member of our church in North Carolina. He gave me one that I've always held on to, and I've always really liked it a lot. He said what they were trained to do when they would talk to people, when they were going to people's houses that, I mean, they had lost their entire home and they didn't know what they were going to do. You know, so he said the best question that he found was, how are you holding up?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Well, why didn't you say it? You got to speak up and say it. How are you holding up?
That's exactly what I said.
And I've used that one. I can't tell you how many times when I've talked with somebody that's going through a difficult situation. And here's why I think that's a distinct advantage over how are you doing, because how are you doing puts the onus on them to take it in a positive direction or a negative direction. And it's almost like putting a lot of pressure on them. But if you ask how are you holding up, that kind of sets the tone that I know you're going through a difficult time. And if you just want to stay there and say I'm having a really hard time, you're just staying where you are, and there's no problem with that. But if they want to say, you know what, I'm holding up okay during this time, and if they want to take it in a more positive direction, that gives them the option of doing it. But I feel like that question takes a lot of pressure off of them. So that's one key question that I think is really good to ask when you know somebody's going through a difficult time, is how are you holding up? Now, and you can do various versions of that. It doesn't have to be exactly that. But here's kind of some other ways that you can get across, I think, the same kind of thing. You can tell them, I hope that you're feeling better. If you know that they're sick, I hope that you're feeling better. That's the same kind of thing that I know you've been feeling bad, and I hope that you've been seeing some improvement. They may say, no, I'm not seeing any improvement. Or they may say, yeah, I actually have been doing better. Here's another example. This would be for a specific instance. I hope that cancer treatments haven't been as hard as they sometimes are. And that gives them the out of saying, yeah, you know, I am really having a hard time with them. The side effects are pretty bad, like you hear about a lot of times. Or sometimes I'll hear people say, you know, I really haven't had a hard time with them so far, or I'm doing really well, or they really weren't that hard on me physically. Here's another example. It's no fun being stuck here in the hospital or nursing home, is it? You know, if somebody is there, just some suggestions of how you can offer them the opportunity to take the conversation in the direction that they want to go with it. You know, there's some people that are just negative people, and it's going to be, they can find a cloud in the sky no matter what day it is. You're going to come across some people like that, and it's not going to matter how good the news is, there's still going to be something wrong. And that's what they're going to want to focus on and talk about. You know, and you be prepared for that and just go along with them, let them talk and let them tell you about it. And if you want to point them in a little bit more positive direction, say, you know, I understand you're still having a hard time with those kind of things. Here's some things I'm glad to hear about. You know, other people are going to be happy and they're going to point out the positive things regardless of how bad the situation is.
I think in some cases where we don't know what to say, we can just give the person a hug and say, I'm here for you.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. that's a good, a response for those times when you kind of don't know what
Yeah.
to say.
Have you ever gone through a hard time where you appreciate someone's sentiment, but you're kind of just like, yeah, shut up. But you appreciate their sentiment.
You mean if I've been going through a hard time and they say
Anybody
something
that,
to me?
you know, somebody,
Oh.
you know,
Oh, that may be a good,
because you know people are gonna come at you, like family, friends, like if your parent dies, you know, something bad.
Yeah.
You know people are, you expect people to come, oh, are you okay, you know, and see how you're doing. But, you know, sometimes people can kind of lay it on a little thick.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, that may be a good question. While we're thinking about ways not to start a conversation versus good ways to do it, have you ever been in one of these situations and had somebody come up to you and say something that really didn't go over well? Could you have an example?
Well, one of the things, I was asked to relieve counselor too, and one of the most difficult things, of course, that was my major in seminary, but one of the most difficult things to do sometimes is just to shut up and say nothing. You know, we're all inclined to want to barge into a room and say something. And like you said, it puts them on guard, it gives them a chance to lie or tell the truth, or to give an organ recital. And I try very hard, and it's hard for me because you know I have a mouth. But I try very desperately to just walk in and say hi, and then shut up, or give them a hug. And it's surprising that no matter what circumstance you're in, it doesn't take just a few seconds before they start talking, they will guide the conversation. And then it gives me a chance, the opportunity to then say something one way or the other, to try to encourage them, try to pray for them, or whatever. But to just say nothing at first, but to listen. And sometimes that silence is deafening for a few seconds. But you're exactly right, you know. Sometimes I found that somebody just wants you to shut up.
Because they've already heard it from 20 other people.
Yeah.
And you said, you know, one of the things that you said was, you know, tell them that you're sorry and whatever like that. I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but Michael's father died when Michael was 12. And Michael's sister, one of Michael's sisters, made a comment about that she was sick and tired of people coming up and telling her that they were sorry. And she was like, if people just need to stop telling me they're sorry. It's not their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. You know, if one more person tells me I'm sorry, I'm just gonna lose it. It was just, and ever since then, I don't think I've ever said that. I do the, you know, I'm here for you line, you know, that because I believe that I'm here for you, and I do believe that, and that's what I tell people. But yeah, I don't ever say I'm sorry anymore because of that.
Yeah. And you know, that's a good illustration of how you may need to relate to people differently when they're at different points in life.
Yeah.
When people are younger, they're not going to hear those phrases like "I'm sorry." We, as adults, we would know how to understand that.
Sure.
You know, we understand that people don't know what to say. They're trying to
Right.
say
Right.
that they're hurting with us. They're
Right.
sorry for what we're going through. Those kind of things. You know, but when you're dealing with, you know, teenagers or, you know, people in their 20s maybe even, or especially children, you know, I think you need to be extra careful about really saying what you mean and being transparent with them if you're going to try to communicate with them. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to be aware of. Yeah. And Jim certainly has a good point about
I like that.
about letting people speak and being a good listener during this. So.
And I say sometimes I have to deliver to people who've lost someone.
Oh yeah.
And the only way I know is I look down and I got the ticket and said condolences or, you know, sorry for your loss and that. And I'll go up there, I know sometimes I'll go out there and say, how you doing? You know, and they're like, not too good. And then that's when I won't say I'm sorry, usually I say my condolences. And they're good with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good illustration of the difference between something that puts the pressure on them to open up versus something that they can accept. And I think that makes a
And
difference.
sometimes they'll ask me, how you doing?
Mhm.
I'm doing good, how are you doing?
Yeah,
And you go, well, I'm not too good. And
yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good option. You can try some of these and let us know.
Really.
Try it out.
You have your
You
assignment.
can do like a
Give the
type thing with
person
Tony.
a hug and then give
He delivers edible arrangements.
I think
When I
one
come
of the
in,
other
I'll beat
things,
up, you'll know that.
one of the other things we need, especially as Christians, is that, you know, it's all different, is a lot of the Christian cliches. You know, you need to be careful with all that. You know, just people were just like, yeah, like her daughter, was it your daughter?
Stepdaughter.
Stepdaughter, saying, you know, she was sick, tired of hearing, I'm sorry. They get tired of hearing all these cliches that, you know, everybody says. So, you just have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
And especially who you're talking to. If it's not a Christian, then, you know, they don't want to hear that. They're mad right now, usually, or angry, or whatever.
Yeah. So,
I got one.
okay.
I'm not saying this is something you say, but I want to know what y'all think about this one. There's situations where I really don't understand what you're going through. I don't know what it's like to lose a child. I can't imagine what you're going through. Was that acceptable or not?
Oh, there's so many people say, I know what you're,
Yeah.
I know how you feel. And, you know, people are like, no, you don't.
Well,
Yeah.
I know-
That's a good
Yeah.
No,
thing.
that's not-
She's
that's
gonna say
not
the
what I'm
opposite
saying.
of I have
I'm
not.
saying, I know how you feel, I've lost my mother too.
Right.
Or I just can't imagine how, I
Can't imagine how you
I
feel.
can't-
See, that's-
I cannot imagine
What
how
you're going through.
the depth
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, I would,
And
I
I
would,
don't know if that's appropriate or
I
not,
would
but I've
come in
said
something
that.
like that I don't know what, I can't imagine what you're going through, or something along those lines that says, that kind of exalts their suffering at that moment because they're feeling it acutely. Even if they lost their parent and you've lost your parent,
Right.
and you say, telling them that you know what they're going through there's part of that is true.
Uh-huh.
Because you've experienced the loss of that same relationship. But at another level, it's not true because
You're not
your
there.
relationship with your parent was not the same as their relationship
Right.
with their parent. So I would always stay away from those kind of statements that I know what you're going through.
Okay.
Although it may be helpful at some point later in the conversation to let them know that you have experienced that without telling them you know how they feel.
Oh, okay.
I would say, draw a line of distinction there. And say, one of the things that helped me when I lost my mom
Okay.
was this.
Yeah, because I always
Rather-
wondered
because that
about
doesn't-
that. Yeah.
That's not a comparison there. You're not saying my hurt was as bad as your hurt. When it may well have been, or your hurt may have been greater.
Yeah.
Maybe you were closer to your mom than they were to theirs.
Such eternity.
But none of that matters at that point. What matters is they're feeling pain, and they don't want to be compared to, or that's just not polite in a general conversational sense of comparing what you've gone through to what they've gone through. But
And some people feel like
Yeah.
you're trying to turn it around about you. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, this is my mom who died, not yours.
Well,
you
plus
know.
everybody grieves differently too.
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, and
That is
if
true.
a person has faith, that's another element that plays into it, or a person that doesn't. I mean, the Compassionate Friends group, I was at Hibbsville Presbyterian Church last night. There were about 30 people in that group. That was, I think, the biggest group that we've ever had. His son had just lost their child within the last 30 days. You walked out of there drained. I mean, we've been going now for over 4 years, and you literally walk out of there when you hear those stories and feel those emotions. And this is a common support group. And even though you have a common support group, I know that when I started talking about faith, they know my faith is what has gotten me through this. But when I start talking, the one couple relatively new, really started, not Christians, started to really attack, But then, they come around too. And so it's very interesting, because they don't have the same stance necessarily.
Yeah. So here's what I want to summarize this section with, is to take the pressure off of the person that you're talking to when you're going to minister. Allow them to not feel well or to be hurt or be sad freely without feeling bad about that. And I think by using some of these phrases or positioning your perspective and asking questions, you can help do that. I want you to be hopeful without being flippant. I thought that was a good way of saying it, that you can stress that we have hope in the midst of difficult situations without diminishing the difficulty of the situation. So have a firm hope that is a foundation there in your confidence, but also be willing to interact with them through their hurt. Here's a couple other suggestions, is to let them know you've been praying for them and that they've been on your mind. I've been thinking about you. The last couple of days, I really haven't been able to get off of my mind what you're going through right now. It's really been a burden on me, and I've been lifting you up in prayer. Letting people know that you've been praying for them and thinking about them is something that takes pressure off of them. They don't have to respond to that. They may say thank you, but
Can I say something?
Sure.
Just as a follow-up to that, Kurt? One of the things I say frequently, and I've said this to some of my employees, an individual who died of cancer, for instance, years ago, and we had a conversation, and he was homebound and so forth, and wasn't coming back to work. I said, Bill, I believe in the power of prayer, and I'm going to continue to pray for you in your situation. That had an impact upon him, because I found out about it later. It's a really interesting story. I won't go any further, but that's something that I've never used. And it does. Whether the person responds or doesn't, it's. I think
yeah, that can be a great door. Sometimes lost people will really appreciate your prayers, even if they're not open to spiritual things normally. I've seen that happen. So I think letting them know you've been praying for them and are going to be praying for them is a good step. Consider offering help, and this comes in different degrees, and this goes to what Debbie was saying earlier. It may be a situation where you're just not in a position to offer help, you're not close enough to the situation, you just want to express some sympathy. Like if you're one of many people going through a funeral line. That's not a situation where you need to offer help necessarily. But if you're a little closer to the situation, there may be a time when you want to offer some help. You could say something that's not, that's going to be more general in nature, and it's not going to be more of a goodwill gesture than necessarily an authentic offer for doing something. And that's normally what you mean when you tell people, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Is there anything I can do to help? Those kind of things. Because you know that normally people are going to say no. So that's a situation where offering that, if they said something, you would probably be willing to do it. But most people recognize that most of the time that's kind of a goodwill offer.
Yeah.
That's a statement of goodwill.
Thanks anyway.
But if you do have something urgent, I'm willing to step out there. But if you really want to take the next step, is to offer some specific things. And can I do this for you? Or I would really like to bring a meal to your house. Or I would really like to do this. Or I would really like to help in this particular way. So it depends on how close you are to the situation as far as what are you going to offer and what are you going to ask for. And at some point, it's okay to even be a little bit more pushy about it and say, I'd really like to do this for you, is that okay? And basically put them in the situation of having to turn you down if they're going to say no. And that would be somebody that you know well, somebody that's a fellow church member, a situation that you know you really can help in a specific way. So gauge the situation and see how involved you can get in those practical situations. Get a sense of their mental and emotional condition when you're talking with them, and see, do they need to sit and talk about what they're going through, or do they need you to change the subject and talk about some other things? You can encounter both of those situations where it could be somebody that is just not had an opportunity to really talk about what they're going through with anybody, and that would be a really good thing. Versus somebody that's talked about it with a number of people already that day, and they're kind of done with that. They don't have any more to offer. They're just going to be repeating what they've already said. And they just need somebody to talk about the weather or how the NFL playoffs went, or something like that. And sometimes that can be really helpful to somebody to get their mind off of what they're going through. And that really takes some sensitivity on your part to gauge the person and their condition. And sometimes you feel like you're doing that well, and they just turn the conversation another direction anyway. And they just kind of let you know, no, I don't want to talk about this, when you thought maybe they did. Or maybe you thought they didn't, they'd rather talk about something else, and they go back to the original subject. And that, let them do that. Let them take the conversation where they would like to go if they show some initiative like that. But for your part, be sensitive about how deeply should I probe into this issue versus maybe I should keep this conversation a little more casual. And then exactly like Jim said, let them talk and try to listen well. So let them guide the conversation as much as is possible. Just ask general open-ended questions and let them respond. If they give quick one-word responses and don't really seem like they want to talk about that much, then move on to the next subject. You know, if you go in to visit somebody in the hospital and you ask them, you know, how are you holding up, or the doctor's giving you some good news, and they say, well, not really, and then don't follow up with much, or they say something about how bad the dinner was they just got, then leave it at that, and they probably don't want to go into details with you.
You can ask them, do they feel like talking?
Sure.
You know, do you feel like talking, or, you know?
Yep.
And if you don't, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some conversational approaches that I want to commend to you, to take the pressure off the person that you're talking to be there for them, to listen well, to offer appropriate things, and then to offer to turn the conversation even if that's what seems like is needed. I want to commend to you using your membership directory. You have a members directory? I actually printed out copies for you guys, and I left them in my office. Can will somebody can you go to my office? They're on, sorry about this, guys. It just occurred to me that I forgot to bring them in here. There's the key. If you go in the door to my office, that's just my office, they should be right on the right-hand side. There's a stack of music equipment, and they sit right on the top of that stack, I think. And it's about 8 or 10 copies of our directory. They're stapled.
Yeah.
3 pages
You
each.
should be on that list.
It's updated.
Yes,
Is he on the
it is
list?
the updated list. So Jim and Cindy and Tony
All
are
right,
on the list.
All right.
Awesome.
I'm somebody,
On the list.
Hey,
You've always.
it's nice to be on somebody's list, isn't it?
well, on somebody's good list.
I'm usually always on the list.
Not the naughty list.
I'm not going there. Don't entrap me.
So Ben will come back, and I'll talk a little bit more about the membership directory. Here, let me go to non-members until Ben gets back. So for non-members, if somebody that you got to gauge how well you know somebody. Is this, and this doesn't apply so much to somebody that's a neighbor. I'm thinking more in the context of our church. If it's somebody that's maybe a regular attender, that's been a regular attender for a long time, and you know them well, that may be a situation where you treat them almost like you would a church member in that situation. But if it's somebody that's just been attending for a couple of weeks, or you've just met them, you don't, or maybe they're a very occasional attender, maybe you've known them they've been coming to the church for a couple of years, but you only see them 2 or 3 times a year. That situation where you're not as close to somebody and you're not as sure what your place is in reaching out to them, possibly. So how do you deal with situations like that? Well, here's what I would say. If you're not sure how outreach is going to be received in those situations, to make an initial push and see what the response is. And to make, with your initial push, I would want you to make a contact that's on the more personal end of the scale. And then follow-up contacts becoming less and less personal if there's little or no response to that initial contact. So here's what I'm thinking of when we talk about the different kind of contacts you can make, starting from very personal contacts over here, which would be like personal visits in the hospital or in the home, to maybe kind of mid-range where you would be doing a visit not in home, or meeting for a meal at a restaurant or something like that, to less personal, less intrusive types of communication, like gifts or cards or phone calls or emails or text messages, things like that. So if you have personal contacts down here and less personal contacts or more casual contacts over here, I think it's good to make an initial push with a more personal type of contact, and then see what the response is. If they respond well and they seem like they appreciate that, then you can proceed accordingly. But if they either don't respond, or they don't respond well, or they respond coldly, then that kind of lets you know to back off and maybe have some less personal contact with them, just to let them know you're praying for them or that you care about them, but you don't want to be intrusive where you're not welcomed or not being received well. So that's kind of, if you don't know somebody well, maybe you got a neighbor that lives next door or a couple doors down, you've seen them out, you've talked to them just a little bit, but you don't know them well, but you know they're going through something. Make an initial contact on the more personal side of it, and just see how it responds. Don't be shy about doing that. And there could be situations where people would respond negatively even to that. And you should be prepared for that. That maybe they don't want to talk to anybody right now, or maybe you caught them at a bad time, and be prepared not to take it personally, however they respond in those situations. But when we're talking about fellow church members, people that we know well, I want to commend to you having an updated member directory and going through it on a fairly regular basis, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. But did everybody get a copy of it? Ours is about 3 pages long, and if you're not used to looking at it, it can take a little bit of figuring to see exactly how's it working. The way our computer system is set up for it is the last name is named up there first in bold with the such and such family, and then the people that are in that family are listed down toward the bottom of the entry. And that has a lot of phone numbers, email addresses, physical addresses for almost everybody. Not everybody has all that information listed, but you've got a lot of it there. Now, your member directory can be a really useful tool in ministering to one another, because there may be somebody that you haven't seen in 3 months, and it just really hasn't crossed your mind that you haven't seen them much. But you look down this list and you see somebody's name and you say, hey, I wonder why I haven't seen or talked to this person in a while. I haven't heard anything from them. I haven't heard anything about them. Maybe it would be a good thing for me to reach out to this person and see what's going on with them. I would fully commend you doing that. Also going down the list and praying for fellow church members. If you decide to take a page a week and say, this week I'm going to pray for the people on page 1. And I'm going to go down the list and maybe take a couple each day, and I'm going to pray for them, pray for their families, and see what they're going through. Great opportunity for you to expand your prayer life and your prayer list beyond maybe what you're used to praying for. And if you're regularly praying for your fellow church members, there's going to be a kind of bond and unity that's going to grow there in your own mind and heart that's going to be pretty amazing. So I want to commend that to you. But another reason that I want to give it to you is because it's a great tool when you do know that somebody is going through a difficult time. For instance, we prayed earlier tonight about Miss Isa and her son's cancer. A great opportunity to reach out to her and let her know that you're praying for them. Now, when I say this, I don't mean that I want everybody tomorrow morning to call Isa. I don't want her phone ringing off the hook. We got to, just because I used her as an example, I called her today, for example. Betty talked to her recently. So she was at church on Sunday. We don't all have to ambush her. But there are probably other people on this list that you may know you haven't heard from. Maybe it's somebody that's living long distance currently and you want to send them an email. Maybe it's somebody that you've seen one member of their family some, but there's another member that hasn't been coming lately, or maybe they're sick, you just don't know what's going on. You can reach out to them by phone call, text message, something like that. Great opportunity for you. So, we haven't talked about this much in the past, but it's something I would like to talk about more is keeping a member directory close by in a space, in a spot where you see it often and can make use of it on a regular basis. So here's a copy for you guys. You're the experts now. You're taking the class, so you know how to do it. So how actually are we going to reach out to people? I gave you the scale of different kinds of contact we have. The less personal being talking about phone calls, text messages, and emails being probably even more extreme than phone calls on that scale, versus gifts and cards. Then you talk about personal contacts where you're possibly meeting for a meal somewhere, or a visit in-home. You decide you want to stop by their house and see them, which is getting a little bit more personal. You're not on a neutral site anymore. Then you're talking about homebound church members or people in the hospital or nursing home, that situation. I would say, how do you make use of phone calls well? Let's start here on the less personal end of the scale and just work through. And actually, we're going to run out of time. So we'll continue on talking about this some next week and expand on it a little bit. But talking about phone calls, you have a great opportunity with the modern technology we have. A lot of times we forget that these things actually make phone calls too, right? We just text and we use them for internet and everything. But oh yeah, you can make a phone call with your smartphone.
Would you give us a class on that?
You may need one. You may need one. Johnny Tripp let me look at his smartphone. I couldn't figure out how to do a thing on that. And I'm pretty good with
He still
technology.
can't either.
You're talking about smartphones, but you don't have an iPhone.
Say that again. Say that real loud. Go ahead.
So
Get him.
here's what I would recommend to you, is that you have, a lot of us have times during the week that we are really doing nothing and we could be making phone calls and touching base with people. Even if you don't get to talk with them for an extended amount of time, you could leave them a message on their voicemail or on their answering machine at home. And that's when you're driving down the road in the car. Now, I want to tell you I'm talking about voice calls right now. I'm not talking about texting or emailing or anything like that. But when you know you're going to be in the car for 15 or 20 minutes, it's easy to turn on the radio and just listen to the radio, and that's fine to do sometimes. I'm not saying you got to do this all the time. But what a great opportunity you have when you're going to be sitting there for 20 minutes, and you can talk on the phone fairly well driving down the road in the car, usually. Most people, if you have a problem with it, then don't do it then. But, most people can talk all right. Maybe you need to get you some earbuds or something like that so you can talk hands-free. That's a good idea. But particularly if you're going on a long trip where you're going to be driving an hour and a half away, why not use that time to get on the phone and make contacts with people that are struggling, going through difficult times, or maybe just other church members that you haven't gotten to talk to in a while. If you can catch them at a good time, talk to them for just a couple minutes, or maybe they're free for 10 or 15 minutes and can talk, and you can give them some encouragement, let them know you're praying for them. Not very time consuming when we're talking about phone calls or even text message or emails, even less time consuming very likely. Find out how people like to communicate. Some people really like to use Facebook to send messages, which I don't like because I've gotten off of Facebook for the most part. I use it for utility purposes. I try not to spend much time on there. But I've had one person recently that likes to send me Facebook messages, and so I'll purposefully log on to Facebook more often so I can see if this person sent me messages that way. If somebody really likes to email, if somebody really likes to text, you can reach out to people that way, and they probably appreciate the way that they communicate, that they enjoy communicating if you'll communicate back with them in that way. So figure out how people like to communicate and then use that. You can send somebody a text message that could be a very big encouragement to them, could come at just the right time of the day when they're really feeling discouraged, and that their phone may vibrate or beep or whatever it does, right at the moment that God intended for your encouragement to get to them. And I've had that happen a few different times when I've sent people an encouraging message that said, I was just thinking about you and wanted to send you some encouragement. And they will say, that actually came at the perfect time. I really needed to hear that right then. So encourage you just to keep lines of communication open and let people know, if we have a church member that is really struggling, really going through a difficult time, it may be that 80 or 90% of our church is praying for them and they're on our minds. But if we're not actually taking that extra step to reach out and make contact with them, they may not ever realize that. It may only be one or two people that have really made that contact. So be willing to step out and make contact with some of these, particularly with some of these ways that they're not very intrusive at all. It's easy to send them a quick message, and then that lets them know as well if they do need to talk to somebody, if they need to call somebody, that you're somebody that cares about them and is listening and is ready. So that's kind of on the less personal side. You can also be a little more personal, sending them cards, gifts, flowers, which that speaks to some people. Some people really love that kind of stuff. I'm not that kind of person. You can just kind of gauge.
Edible arrangements.
Yeah, Tony, that was a good suggestion by Tony last week. I would much rather get an edible arrangement than a
There's a lot of area of delivery, so.
Yeah. I know some churches have like a flower policy. It's like if you go in the hospital, you're getting sent some flowers. And, some people love flowers, and I expect people that really love flowers set that policy, because they would have felt really bad if they were in the hospital and nobody sent them flowers. Okay, and that's fine. If you've got somebody that seems like they would be a flower person, then reach out to them in that way. But if you've got somebody like me, or if Van's in the hospital, it's not going to be my first thought. Well, let me go buy some flowers and send them to Van.
We'll get you a Chick-fil-A biscuit.
You bring me some Taco Bell.
So, cards, that's not my thing. I appreciate the thought that goes into, okay, you sent me a card. And, I've gotten cards from different people, like on Pastor Appreciation Month, and they've written personal notes. And I definitely do appreciate those kind of things. And I think the more personal it is, probably the broader the appeal. If you're going to send a card and just sign your name to it, okay, big deal. Some people may still love it, but I'm like, okay.
My notes about Pastor
But
Brent.
yeah, if you write something personal in it, that's probably going to mean a lot more to somebody. So.
No flowers and put more than your name on it.
Does that mean I can't underline anything?
What? If I'm in the
What, on the
hospital,
card?
you send
Underline
it.
stuff on the card?
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Don't worry about
even that,
I love
even that
flowers.
shows that you thought about it a little more than just,
Hospital.
I walked by on the shelf and picked this one up and put it in the envelope. and set it.
No.
So I think some people love getting that stuff, and I think some people just appreciate the thought that went behind it.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind when you're doing those things. But that is a way that you can reach out in a little bit more tangible way than just a text message or just a phone call. But it's still not very intrusive, because they just receive the gift and not much is required of them. It's about 8 o'clock, so let's push the pause button right there, and we'll talk next week about some more personal types of communication and outreach you can do.
I left Michael off of my family. Michael's in my
Okay.
family, y'all.
Wait a minute.
Should I talk to Monica or something?
Yeah, I think Monica usually puts in here the information that she has, so
Okay.
she probably just didn't have that written on a
So,
card or
under
something.
the Barlow family, it's Michael Jacobs. His last name is Jacobs. Just so, please, thank you.
I noticed at the bottom of page 2 on the right-hand side, the Smith family, there's 2 Smith families there.
Yeah.
The lower one
Yeah, who is
doesn't have
that?
a name.
Yeah, who is that? I was gonna ask
Candace,
my
the
son.
email address says Candace Smith.
Candace S. Smith, I think.
Candace S.
Yeah,
Who is that?
she's been on the list since I've been here, and I've never met her,
Oh.
so I'm not
Does
sure.
anybody know
Doesn't ring a
that?
bell. Doesn't ring a bell.
I looked at the address.
So maybe we should call her?
Yeah, I think Monica updated the list a little while back, and she didn't move her to the inactive list just because we wanted to ask around a little bit to see if anybody knew who she was. So she's been on there since before I've been here, so I'm not sure. She might have been a college student or.
You get this thing 10 pages.
Well, that address
Yep.
is, that's 23462 is not close.
All right.
It's,
Thank you guys for being here tonight. Hope it's been some
Thank you.
interesting, lively discussion. Thank y'all for your input. Y'all had some good input as well, and we'll talk some more about making these different kinds of contacts and about how to. Want to give some personal advice on hospital visits and those kind of things next week, when those are good, when visiting people in their homes and things like that. So I think that should be pretty interesting. I'm going to try to think of a few good stories to tell of different things that have happened to me different times. I'm sure there's some in there. So, all right, let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the time we've had together tonight to think about how we can reach out to people and let them know that we care and want to minister to them, that we want to show your love and compassion as we know that you are the good shepherd. We want to relay that to people in a very tangible way. So we pray that you would continue to do a work of equipping us through this study. And I thank you for everybody here tonight. We lift up once again the prayer requests that were mentioned and pray for your power and your work in those situations. And we ask all this tonight in Jesus' name.